Welcome to the inner world of filmmaking. I'm your host, Tammy McGarrow. I'm a writer, director, editor, and a podcast producer. In this show, I will interview filmmakers in all facets of production and distribution. Today, we're talking about safety on set. And if you have guns on set, an armorer on set is important. I'm excited to have Dan Cheatham, who is an actor, first AD, stunt coordinator, armorer, and so much more. Welcome, Dan. Happy to have you on the show today.
Hi, Tammy. How you doing?
Good. Well, I'm excited to talk about safety on set because that's such an important role to have on set. So who's in charge of safety on a set?
Well, theoretically, everyone's in charge of safety on the set. Every single person. And that goes top down from the producer down to the production assistants, the girl who's doing or guy who's doing the MUA work. There's a safety aspect of that. And with makeup and hair, there are the gaffers, there are the grips that have to make sure that the lines are laid right, that the electricity's, the G&E is working. The camera's got to be placed so that it's still safe for people to work with. Clear out to the guy, poor person who's having to deal with the parking.
Right.
It's everyone's in charge of safety on set. But when we kind of get rolling on a production, the person who's running the set is generally the first AD, right? He's calling the shots of what's going down, who's where, and what's to be happening on the set as it's rolling. And I work occasionally on as a first assistant director or a second assistant director, depending on the set. It's the top of the chain of the command. Most of the people are not talking to the director or the camera, with the exception of the camera and the director there who are conversing about the creative aspect of what they're trying to get in frame. So the first assistant director is there to make sure that everything is working as is necessary in order to get everything framed. So it's kind of the point where everything comes together. That means all the different departments are being directed through the first assistant director. For that very reason, it's the first assistant director together with the director who then gives the safety speech at the very beginning of every day, not beginning of a shoot, but beginning of every day of the shoot, to make sure that everyone's conscious of any of the dangers that might be happening on that particular set for that particular day, for that particular scene. And if there's anything that needs to be changed, it's reported to the first or second assistant director to see to it that that actually happens. And then after that, then there's a cascade of people in the various departments.
So what are some of the protocols for a safe set, and especially in the safety meeting that you need to hit?
Well, the one that I always hit on, and that's based on insurance cases, is look down. We have cables on the ground. And the majority of the cases of safety where someone's gotten hurt on set is generally someone tripping over a wire or bumping into the corner of something, and things fall because of that. So the main thing is to look down or look around, be conscious of what's around you as you walk. If you're going underneath lighting, there may be a cable hanging down from it. If you're going into the set or coming back out of the set where we're actually filming, sound may have a wire or two on the ground. It's not always wireless. And I mean, it's nice that wireless technology is coming up, but wireless does not preclude that there's other wires that are there, right? That could be just simply the cable going to microphones like the boom, or it could be some of the wiring that's filling up the so-called bricks, the batteries that are used in all the different things, including the lighting today is digital and much of it's battery powered, which is great because we've gotten rid of a lot of the electrical cords. But still, those batteries have to be charged, and that's usually got a cord associated with it, and it's got a power outlet associated with it. And it's also good to have someone on G&E, which is your electric, who knows that you're using enough power and that there's enough power available and it's not going to blow all the circuits.
Yeah, another thing is to look up. Remember, we were on the set a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
and the director kept bumping into the boom.
Yeah.
And other people too. But
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
That was a low boom. Right. So yeah, just stay aware. Right. And as a first AD, I try to keep people aware, right, of anything that's there. if there's a table there that's got a very sharp corner, as people are going past that table in and out on the set, I will point it out to them a couple times. Just keep them conscious of it so that they're not, going home with a great big black spot on their knee.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Have you ever witnessed a bad accident on set?
Witnessed a bad accident, not here in the United States, over in Germany. It's not so much a bad accident, but when you're dealing with stunts or you're dealing with weapons, especially swords, battle axes, spears, things like that, they've got points and people do get scratched or people do get bumped. When you're dealing with animals, I used to work off of horses with equestrian stunts. Animals can be unpredictable, right? And I've seen people had their feet stepped on by one of the horses passing, right?
Oof.
And then that's another safety factor. Are people out of the path of where the horses are supposed to run, or where, I don't know, it could be the sheep bouncing around, who knows what the farmyard set may look like. It could be little things. I was on a huge set where they had chickens, the biggest disaster ever, because they wanted to get the chickens in the shot. And they had released the chickens. And unfortunately, caged chickens, the first thing they do is scatter, right? And they go away from camera.
Oh, wow.
Well, those chickens they can scratch people if they, when they're collecting them to bring them back to the cage. And so you just have to be aware of what you're doing. So.
Yeah. So you're also an armorer. What are the duties of an armorer on set?
The duties of the armorer. Well, again, you're reporting to the prop master, right? And the prop master is with the art department. That's your department, right? And if you can't be on set for any reason, you are 10-1 running to the restroom, the prop master is there to represent you while you're not there, right? So there is a line of succession for things dealing with arms and armor on these sets. Many times when it's a larger set, the armor will also have assistants that are there who have had some background and training in it to see to it that everything does stay safe when, say, the armor is arming one of the actors, right? Because that's an individual thing between the actor and the armorer to see to it that the transfer is safe.
And then do you train the person on how to use the gun?
I would love to be able to do that every time, right? Too often you have a set where they, the first time that the people are seeing it is when you get to the set. I generally am always arguing for a day of training prior to the actual set on any of the scenes where a gun, a fake firearm, a real firearm with blanks, even if it's a quote toy firearm or the horrible term prop firearm, anything can be a prop. Prop doesn't mean anything. Anything, a candlestick can be a prop, right? So a prop gun doesn't mean anything. It's because it doesn't tell me what kind of gun that is. But you want your cast to be aware of what they're going to be dealing with. And if they get the chance to train on it before they can actually be on the set, all the better, because they're aware of it. They can actually interact with that object more naturally, as if, the actor knew what that object is. And when it comes to firearms, you do need some training. Not every single firearm is different. Even if they may look the same, let's call it an automatic. Every automatic I have found sits in the hand differently. It slide operates differently with different resistance. It is fired differently. The ammunition loads differently. The magazines are different. The calibers are different. So there's a lot of differences between it. You can't just say, oh, and this person will have an automatic or this person will have a revolver. That's not even a quarter of the way to defining what they're going to be doing. All right. So they do need to define it and to actually interact with that object, be it a non-firing weapon or a blank firing weapon, before they get to set. We do not have live rounds on any of the sets. Live round being an actual bullet, a cartridge with a bullet that's fired, a projectile out of out of a real gun that can do so. We don't have those on sets. There's very little to zero reasoning to actually have something like that on the sets. Yes, we do practice with the cast, and I would always argue that we should do so.
Well, yeah, because every gun has a different kickback. So I'm sure that when
or no kickback,
or no kickback,
right? You have like the non-firing firearms. The stupidest thing in a frame is when the person gets a non-firing firearm. These things are designed not to be able to fire, and even though they operate, like the slide operates, the magazine can go in and out. Some of them can eject dummy cartridges, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still, when they're holding it, and that the sound and the flame that's coming out of the end, the muzzle flash, will be added in an edit, right? In CGI, it's kind of added in for a list of reasons. Still, if they don't buck the weapon, as I say, if they've not trained bucking the weapon correctly, it looks wrong, right? It looks like it's coming out of their wrist,
right,
or it's coming out of their whole arm, right? And the body's not reacting to it. And that's part of that training, right? If you want it to look right, you train it, right? And that time to train it needs to be budgeted in. Imagine you get a plastic gun, right? Some airsoft that's actually, it's an all plastic frame. It's got no weight to it. It's like a plastic sword, right?
Right.
You can't make a plastic sword look easily like a heavy steel sword. The heavy steel swords have weight to them. Even an aluminum sword is weighted differently than a steel sword. And so you need to train with the actor to emulate the look of weight, the look of heft, the look of the momentum of the weapon moving around, right? What I love are these, let's call them action films, where the police or the military unit commanders or whoever, they've got a very clearly a military rifle in their hands, and they're running through the bushes or rolling around, and you can see the thing's plastic, right?
Right.
And anyone who's dealt with these things are just shaking their heads. It's like, yeah, okay, they did their best, right?
Right.
Right. But it doesn't need to be that way. You can actually learn to emulate, to pretend, so to speak, that the weight is there. It's just it does need a little training. It's not a on-set thing that's like, oh, and here's your plastic gun. Now make it look like it weighs 15 pounds with the ammo in it,
Right, right. So what does an armor, is that only firearms or is it training swords? So what does that encompass?
My understanding of an armor is anyone who's dealing with what would be classically known as a weapon, right? A classic weapon can be a dagger, right? It's a common thing. It can also be a hammer. It can be a pole arm. It can be let's get into the ones that I do consider needing supervision on set. It could be a crossbow, right? It can be a longbow. It can be a compound bow. It can be any of your automatics, your revolvers, your submachine guns for, like, let's call it an old gangster film. It can be any of those things. There's a long list of what the armor should be actually responsible for. And there's a little bit of overlap with the stunt coordinators. I also work as a stunt coordinator on occasion. So there's a level of coordination that's necessary. So the armor is going to be the one who arms the cast member, debriefs them on what they're dealing with, and if necessary, trains them on the use of that particular, let's call it, prop for that particular scene. But if that prop, for instance, is let's call it a revolver in this case, it's laying on the ground, and the hero, the antagonist, or whoever has to roll over something, do a flip, pick this thing up off the ground, and then fire 2 shots. You're dealing with the stunt coordinator and an armor at the same time.
Wow.
There's a lot there. I mean, it really is a lot. And that's why you need the people who know what they're dealing with. Let's also talk about, like this, you were saying, safety on the set. what's allowed.
Right.
Are the producers getting the permissions correctly? Right? Did they? They say, okay, let's call it private property. Right? Oh, it's on private property. We don't need a permission to have an airsoft gun on my set. Right? Well, that private property is open to the open street, and anyone can see someone marching around with 2 airsoft M4s on your set, which are, what looks to be an AR-15, which everyone will panic about. Next thing you know, someone's on the phone. They're calling in the SWAT team.
Right.
And your set has got a big problem on its hands. And you say, oh, but it was private property. Yes and no. Yes, you are filming maybe on private property, but it's visually seeable by the public. At that point, you need further permissions.
And do you also need a cop on set too?
A police, well, they generally refer to them as a monitor, right? A police monitor. That's the common denominator there. We had a set in San Diego, it was a couple years back, just as an example, and we were filming in the middle of a small part of San Diego, and we were filming at night to avoid a lot of the the public watching kind of thing. But at the same time, this had big windows on the side, so it was lit from the inside, so people could theoretically see in. And the producer, together with the director, they got the permissions from the city. We spoke it through with the film office, who then connected us up with the police office that was responsible for that district. They assigned us 2 police monitors that would be monitoring for the course of that night. And they were on set with us. They did a weapons check with me, the armorer, on that set to see to it that the weapons that we said would be on that set were the ones that were on the set. They were all fake firearms and blank firearms not firing blanks, so that we had no blanks on the set. And once that check ran through, we filmed. They were there to answer any questions with the public that might say, well, what's going on here? I can see there are guns inside this set. Is this a film set? And the officers are your interface between the set and the public. And they answer those questions. If there's a phone call that goes into 911, 911 is informed that there's a film set at that address, right? And that there are fake firearms, or, it could be also a knife fight, right? Or walking around with a crossbow or a bow or a sword, right? And that can bring in a 911 call. But if the 911 offices, there's 2 of them, if they are informed, then there is an officer on set, all the better. Yes, you will pay for it. All of this needs to be budgeted in correctly. But at the same time, you walk away with a clean bill at the end. You're protected in a lot of ways, even from a lawsuit, because you've hit all the protocol lists that is necessary for you as a producer, a director, and for those people who are responsible on set, such as the armorer, the stunt coordinator, and let's take that a little bit further. Also, makeup. If someone is bleeding on set, right, that may also bring in that call. So people do need to be informed. If the public can see into your set from outside, right? Or if you're in a warehouse, it's all closed off, but you've got permissions and you are firing blanks in there, right? Which I won't recommend because the sound people will kill you, right? All of it, or pegging every time one of those things go off. But someone may be able to hear it. So seeing it can also be hearing it, right? In terms of the public surrounding you. And that's part of the safety. It's making sure that all those check marks have been checked off before you get to set.
So then the protocol is to call your city representative, right? I'm sorry, what did you say that was?
The film office, right? You're going to want to contact the film office or be put in touch with the people in your county or your city who are responsible for giving the filming or location permissions to film. And you sit down with them either on the phone, I don't know, a Zoom call or at their office. Go through what you're planning on doing according to your script and get the permissions rolling, right? If you have pyrotechnics on your set, right, you're going to burn something, you're going to blow something up, or something smaller, there may be a firecracker that goes off, right? Well, in the state of California, most of that's illegal unless it's licensed, okay? So once you have a pyrotechnician hired on, right, they're going to also be clearing that with the fire department, right? And the location will be key on things like that. You know, if you could easily start a fire, then they may make some other suggestions together with you on locations, right, where the fire danger may not be quite as high. It's just best to clear all the planning for your scene that you want to get on film, right, get framed, and make sure that these are things that you need for your frame, all right? And then how do you do those safely? How do you get all the permissions in place that you're going to need? And all the people who will be affected in some form or fashion are informed.
And really through the film office, that's will give you what you need to do. So once you talk to them.
Yeah, they're kind of like the hub right there. But they're going to be the interface between your county or your city and the city officials who need to be informed, such as the police department or the fire department, etc.
How do you find the local film office? You just like Google it and then you find out which one's in your county? For somebody who may not know this.
Yeah. You go on to, you go to the city website, right? And like the larger cities, obviously LA's got it for every single little sub-county. San Diego has a website, deals with the film, I think it's called the San Diego Film Office or Film Commission. It's not a commission though. We need to get a film commission there. And on that website, there'll be a permissions form, location, you know, that you have a shoot location permission from the city. That's a piece of paper that you'll want to have on set in the case that people are coming to set and saying, well, do you have permission to be filming here? Blah, 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 blah. Yes, it's a piece of paper, but it's an official piece of paper. And that office will be the office that will also then put you in touch with any monitors in any of the divisions that or departments that need to know, right? Need to know that you're doing that.
Oh, wow. That's good to know. Now, what about a private property? Like, do you still need to go through the protocol of letting the film commission or the film?
Like I said, yes, if there's something that's visibly or audibly questionable in the ears and eyes of a public, right? Someone who's not informed and can't be as easily informed. That could be a passerby on a bicycle, you know. Who knows who's going to pick up the phone and call 911? Let's say you're working with horses. Someone else may determine that your handling of that particular horse is just not safe, or it's unfriendly, or they're not getting enough to eat. You know, I've heard everything, and they're going to call that in, right? And then who do they call? Not Ghostbusters. It's going to be 911, right? And they will, you know, the people at 911 are trained on a lot of this, and if you're on their list, all the better.
Yeah. So there's other terms like weapon technician. Is that the same as an armorer?
No, it's not. The armor is the interface between that particular prop and your cast, and it's a specialist. You can call him more of a weapon specialist in the use of that particular weapon in the form that you're wanting it for your frame. A weapons technician we're probably talking more a gunsmith, a specialist on that particular thing. Like, you know, a bowyer works with the bows, a gunsmith works with the guns, a smith will, just a plainsmith will be working with various other things like the bladed weapons. Those will be swordsmiths or knife smiths. And they are the people who technically work with the materials of that particular prop, that particular weapon in this particular case, the firearm or the sword. Not every sword can be used for fights, right? You don't want to go buy some cheap sword and then go out and slam it against another sword just to see the blade break. clean and go flying somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
From my own experience, on a live performance, I parried a blade once, and this was actually well smithied blade, and it broke. It went right past my head.
Wow.
Right now, luckily, I was in chainmail, and and this is a performance out on a field, and there were just two of us on that particular sword fight, because it was the apex of that particular scene with the horses had been cleared and everything. We make sure that there's a space around us, and that means even breakage space for the sword fight to occur safely. As it was, that particular blade broke, and it came just down behind me into the sand. Right, but there's a danger associated with it, and that was with a well smithy blade. We found the sword had taken a really deep dent at one point, and that weakened the blade. And that's where you need to know what kinds of blades you're picking up to do a rapier fight or German Landsknecht, Katzenbalger against a hand and a half. There are specialists for all of this, and the technicians are the smiths.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, stuff can happen.
Yep. There's nothing is perfectly safe.
Right. And there's been several deaths over the years due to mishaps with guns on set.
Mm-hmm.
Most recently, the deadly result of DP Halyna Hutchins. So could you talk me through what happened?
Well, I can. Let's use that one as an example. Okay. The majority of the deaths that I've looked into on set occurred specifically with a revolver. They were not with the automatic weapons. And the reason why the revolver is different than the automatics, these semi-automatics, when you are picturing a revolver from the front of the revolver, you're dealing with the cylinder. And then the cylinder has the where the bullets are going in from the back of the cylinder. From the front of the cylinder, you can see the bullet heads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And for that reason, they use dummy bullets, right? Which are bullets. A true dummy is a bullet that's either 100% solid, right? It's poured metal. It's the whole thing is just a solid piece, or it's a cartridge with the bullet head on top of it, with either a spent or removed primer and no propellant inside. Propellant being, in common speak, it would be gunpowder, right? The thing that shoots the bullet through the barrel, out the muzzle, right? And this dummy will have BBs in it so that you know that it's empty. So there's a rattle test. You're going to rattle the thing to make sure that your dummy is really a dummy. And you can see if it's a solid poured dummy that it's one chunk. It's a great big chunk of metal, right? And that's very visible. And it doesn't even have a primer point, right? If it's a close-up dummy that's made from the components of a real bullet, then you need to rattle test it. And then they put those into the chambers of that cylinder so that from the front, when you're visually shooting the camera at the front of your revolver, you can see the bullet heads in the cylinder. That's why they do that, right? If you put a blank in there, you don't see the bullet head. If you don't put anything in the cylinder, you can see in many of them all the way through, right? And it doesn't look like the gun is then, quote, loaded, unloaded, loaded, excuse me. And that's why they do this. Revolvers also are not closed chambers. Those bullets are rotated up to the barrel and fired. So there's lots of open space surrounding it where the propellant is expulsed. That's different than from the semi-automatics. Now, what happened in this particular case on that set in New Mexico is that they were using dummy bullets that came from a box after the fact. It turns out that someone had put live rounds. It's probable that someone put live rounds into a box marked dummies. And that made its way into the revolver. The armor is to rattle test those before loading, right? I would prefer loading those actually together with the cast member. But when you've got a lot of guns, you may not get that privilege of doing so, right? She loaded, I think 5, and then the last one just before it went into set on a 6-chamber weapon This was a revolver in 1890s, I believe, or approximately that period, revolver type. They then broke for lunch, stored it in the prop chamber, which is a trailer on that set. They were locked up properly, as I understood, and then they were removed after set. That was when the last one was loaded. From the outside, we can't know all the exact details of how the transfer happened, but apparently the first assistant director took it into the set. That's a break of protocol. The armor is the one who's supposed to be arming each individual cast member, not the first AD. The first AD has maybe in charge of the safety on these. If it's not the armor, the only other person who should be doing that is the prop master, who is trained also with this particular weapon or this particular thing. Now, these were real guns, right? They were using real guns. They were not using blank firing guns, which are designed differently. They have solid barrels. They vent differently. They were using a real gun. That's fairly common because not all guns have been remade as a replica. But at the same time, the dummies that are going into this had better not be live rounds, because it takes a trained eye to understand and know and recognize the difference between a dummy and a live round. So then the first AD apparently transferred it to the cast member. The cast member should have known. You don't just take it verbally, this is cold, right? In other words, it's not a hot blank. In other words, a fireable cartridge in your gun. He was told it was a cold weapon. Anytime you're handed a real gun, right? I can tell this to the world. If you're handed a real gun, one, you should be trained on uses of real guns. You should also recognize what you're dealing with, right? And not rely on anyone else who's telling you that, right? Because you don't know until you've checked it yourself. And it's just protocol with any real weapon, any real firearm, that you check it yourself, right? Or you check it together with the armorer who loads it for you, right next to you. Right, and that's not what happened in this particular case. Mm-hmm. The firearm was declared cold, meaning that it does not have a fireable cartridge in it. It's not going to explode in their hands, etc. And from there, it was transferred to the cast member, who then was listening to the directives of the director and the DP on camera as to what they needed for their frame. All right. And they were all operating under the, as we found out, false assumption that this was a cold weapon, right? And since no one checked it along the line, and the armorer did not arm the cast member directly, we have cascading mistakes along that line of protocol that allowed a live round in a real weapon to make it clear to being in front of the camera. What I like to do on sets like that, I do not have a gun in front of the camera until we're actually ready to roll. I try to replace that with a solid rubber gun for aligning camera, aligning the shot, and getting everything prepared. That is the safest way, and it's all that's necessary for that frame. Right? This is about what you're going to get in the frame. And then after that, just before we roll, we arm the cast member with whatever firearm will be necessary. And knowing that the aiming of the gun, the handling of the gun has been trained prior to being on that set. If not, they're definitely, you're standing right as an armor as close as you possibly can to make sure that nothing's going wrong with it. All right. And that means also a sword. That can be a dagger, right? If you're making a close-up shot with a real knife blade, it's sharp, right? And when that close-up is finished, you're going to replace it with the stunt weapon for the fight, which is not going to be sharp, right? And so after the take is finished, the weapon is either holstered, right, if it's a large set and everyone's been cleared on those weapons, or they are immediately removed by the armor and secured again.
So having a real bullet in there, I mean, how does that happen? I mean, in the case, like, how does that, I don't get it.
That's the $1 million question right there. How did a live round, as we refer to them, actually make it into a case labeled dummies? That's happened at the place, probably the prop house or whoever's in charge of those dummies, right, at their location prior to getting on set in that particular case, right? Or if it were on set, someone intermingled when cleaning up or organizing the rounds that were being used, the cartridges that were being used. The dummies were intermixed with live rounds. What were the live rounds doing on that set in the first place? These are questions that the authorities are going to have to explain with some detective work, right, in that particular case.
But you can tell between a real bullet and a dummy bullet by just shaking it.
The trained eye will be able to look for certain things. Has the primer actually been shot before? That's not a guarantee. That was what went wrong with the Crow. Has the primer been removed on the backside of that cartridge? Rattle testing it to see if it does rattle, and removing it if it does not rattle. Just being on the safe side. Or if it's they also have snap caps, which are training rounds that are actually very precision, that people utilize when training real firearms. It's for their dry fire training, right? Those recognizing, is it a snap cap, right? Is this particular dummy bullet just a training round for dry firing? The trained eye is what this is about, right? And human interaction with the thing. It's all about training. It's knowledge, and you need to know what you're dealing with.
Well, and then how do we prevent these things happening in the future? I think one thing you alluded to is you should never be taking a weapon from anybody but the armorer or the prop master.
Actors should train on it.
Yeah.
They should go to, if they're going to have to deal with firearms in a particular situation, they should interact with the armorer who's going to be on that set and train for that particular set. And if they're regularly doing it, I would suggest they go to an archery range. They go to a gun range with a trainer and see what they're dealing with. And they're also going to learn to act it better if they know what they're dealing with, because they've dealt with it, right? You learn a quick respect for these things. And having that respect for a firearm or for a long weapon, or a bow, or even a spear, you know what it's capable of if you've actually worked with it before, right? And your interaction with that particular thing is going to be different. It's going to be slightly different. And that very slightly different will register on the camera. And it makes it very, very believable.
No, I totally agree. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about shooting guns. I was thinking, well, the actors probably should go to a shooting range and practice, because then they would know.
Yeah, book in with a trainer to do such, right? There are entities out there that will help you with that training. I'm certified by one of them. I would suggest, as I understood, Roger Moore had a fear of the PPK he was working with as James Bond, right? He didn't like the guns. And that can be very detrimental if you're James Bond, right?
Right.
And just it's you need to know, you need to be that character in that particular role. And that character has had training and interaction with these particular items, such as a firearm, then you should know what that means, right, as an actor. And then to switch it over on the other end, the producer needs to know, right? A director, if he wants that in that particular shot, needs to know what he's dealing with. The DP and second AC, that's the camera and the assistant to the camera, also need to know what are the measures, danger measures that they need to take. Do they need to put up bulletproof glass on anything that goes bang, right? Including the pyrotechniques that may be on that particular set. When you fire at something, it ricochets off a wall, at least in your mind. Well, the pyrotechnicians put little charges on a wall and blow little holes, right? Well, anytime you do something like that, there's going to be pieces, particulate, shrapnel, whatever that's coming off that wall, right? Well, do they need to put up a perfectly transparent piece of glass between camera and that area? If that's, that kind of debris is coming at the camera, right? Not to mention the cameras cost a fortune, but people can't be replaced, and people can get injured by flying particulate. Let's just call it that.
Right. Or even, what is that called? That cops wear on their chest?
Flak jacket. That's what I usually refer to it as. It's not a flak jacket because it's
a safety vest.
It's a safety vest. It's either a Kevlar or it's got ceramics plating inside. It depends on what kind you're talking about. Those are heavy.
Yeah. Well, but if you're getting shot at, you might want to have one on the other side that you're not in, like the DP. And also, like you were saying too, why are you so close? Maybe you need to be a little further away.
There's some lensing that can be used to give you a little bit more of a distance from that particular object.
Exactly.
Or many of the cameras can be, like for instance, racking of the lens focusing is done wirelessly. You're away from the camera. Do you actually need to be sitting directly behind that camera when this
Right.
thing's rolling?
Right.
Can you not set the camera or can you not animate that camera to the point that you do not need to be in the line of fire at all, period? Yeah. Right? It's just a safety measure of how to think about how do we get that shot, right, without anyone getting hurt, right? Does the sound guy need to have his boom over it, right? In other words, does he need to be within that 8-foot distance of that particular thing? Or can you set the boom on that particular one and move away?
So any last comments for our listeners on safety?
Think it through, right? I'm a bit of a fan of storyboarding, when it comes to a lot of this. And people see visions in their minds of what they'd like to have, right? And if they storyboard what they're actually wanting to get in the frame, they're already eliminating a lot of the potential dangers that wouldn't be necessary, right? Because they realize you don't need the whole car. You don't need the gun right at the lens, right? You may, working with a stunt coordinator on the fights, right? What is the best angle for each stunt that's going down with people? If you're shooting an arrow or swinging a sword, do you need the 4 fighters all at the same time, right? Are they always going to be in your frame, all 4 of them? Well, you got a wide shot in the first place, you pull back, right? But you don't have all the people right up there next to them. When you're doing a close-up, you don't have all 4 people in the close-up, right? You got 2 people in the close-up, right? That's already reduced 2 people from being in front of that camera, right? And that's what I'm saying. Kind of sketch out the frames that you're wanting to put together. Just visualize it beforehand. And then on the production end, get your permissions lined up, right? Get your budget ready to do what you're actually wanting to do safely, right? Don't make safety a budget problem.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I think we got a lot of good information.
It was fun. I love talking to you. Working together with you on set's always been fun.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @TammyMagaro. Until we meet again, what's your story?